Bill Koenig, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Bill. I work out of the White House. I've been there 14 years. We have an internet news service that focuses on world news that's biblically relevant. And we are just blessed to be in Washington right now. We continue to appreciate your prayers. Things are getting a little bit more intense in Washington and in Jerusalem. So thank you for all that you all being here today. Appreciate it.
Show them your book and give them your website real quick.
Okay, yes, our website address is watch.org, watch.org. And here's a copy of my book, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. I focus on what happens to the United States when Israel gets pressure to give up their covenant land. I also studied every Middle East leader that's attempted to divide the land of Israel and what has happened to them personally, as well as Israeli prime ministers, American presidents back to Woodrow Wilson. And also just when the United States gets involved in the peace process, how disruptive things get politically for our leaders in Washington. Anywhere from a week long to weeks long. And we have seen this over and over again. And I have 9 different disruptive periods documented in our book. We're in our 20th printing right now, and we continue to, this is a good foundation, Eye to Eye is, and then we continue to add the updates online right now, because otherwise this book would be about twice its normal size, or twice the size it is today. So, you know, the bottom line is God gave Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants the covenant land of Israel. And no earthly leader, President of the United States, EU official, UN official, or even an Israeli prime minister has the rights to partition or divide the covenant land. And when you see that land touched or in play, you can feel a collective fury or fire, atmospherically and politically, from the God of Israel. So, you know, we're blessed to understand Genesis to Revelation is the Word of God. And that's what I attempt to do with this book, give the scriptural foundation and then show the consequences to those that attempt to divide the land.
Bill Salus with Prophecy Depot Ministries, author, book Psalm 83, new book called Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Revealing the Ancient Prophecy of Elam. My website is prophecydepot.com, like Home Depot, prophecydepot.com. I'm also a radio host, and we'll be recording this today for my radio show that's aired in Southern California. So as you ask questions, I will likely repeat them for the listening audience when we do air this. And then either Bill or I will field that question. Now we have a microphone in the middle of the room. I notice it looks like it's for the shorter people, but we can lift that stand up. But I'm not sure we'll need it. So we'll see as you ask a question, we'll have you stand up. But if we need to, we can have you move to the mic. But it might be a little bit of inconvenience for some of you sitting out in left field there to get out and cross over and stuff like that. But so we'll go ahead and start fielding some questions.
Sidelines, act, and in what way?
Okay, so the question is, how long until Iran will have a nuclear weapon, either acquired or developed, and will Israel act unilaterally to strike perhaps Iran's nuclear program, since America seems to be on the sidelines on that? Go ahead, Bill, why don't you start?
You know, Israel's intelligence on the ground in Israel through the Mossad and even through some cooperation with the CIA is pretty amazing. They probably know more about Iran's program than most people in the Iranian government. However, since there's been a lot of focus on Iran over the last year and a half, and even at Prime Minister Netanyahu's address to the UN, they're doing what they can to be more and more careful with their program. They're burying it deeper underneath the ground. These are very smart, clever, strategic people. One thing that's important here is Iran is committed to a nuclear weapon. This is something, no matter as a friend, a former CIA individual that spent 28 years with Iran, focusing on Iran and the Middle East, she said that they are so committed, the leadership of Iran is so committed to a nuclear weapon, they will continue it even if the Iranians have to be eating grass. In other words, that's how committed they are to completing a nuclear weapon. One other thought is Iran was up against the ropes late last year. The 85% of Iran that do not favor that leadership were very pleased because the leadership of Iran was being backed into a corner. And what happened is the P5+1, that's the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the US, the UK, France, Russia, and China, and Germany, P5 plus Germany, decided, hey, let's do peace talks. Let's do talks, even though we found out later that the White House had been working with them behind the scenes for 12 months previous. And according to friends in Israel, this was just horrible because literally they were up against the ropes. They were all but knocked out. And the United States mostly sent a lifeline to Iran, freed up money, got rid of some of the boycotts, weak negotiations, and more than ever, Iran is more committed to completing the weapon than ever before. And there's a chance that they might have already completely finished it. We don't know that for a fact because literally Iran's doing everything they can to be as quiet and as secretively as possible. But Israel is fully aware. The leadership of Netanyahu, who's written books about this problem, knows that Iran is committed to finishing a weapon. So don't know where they are right now, but that's a little history to kind of give you a better perspective of the fact the international community is not helping the situation.
Yes, and Iran is in a position where they have and feel pretty comfortable that they can spread their hegemony. Their eschatology, Shiite eschatology, that their 12th Imam, the Mahdi, is about to come. If they create an apocalyptic condition in the Middle East, if they have a nuclear weapon, they can spread their hegemony, their Shiite theology, their control over the Middle East. They can be in control of the Islamic Caliphate. These things are driving them, and they're seeing the Arab world implode around them. So there's nothing really to stop them. I agree with you, Bill, that they are full swing on this situation. As far as America's role in the situation, along with the P5+1, they're okay with containment versus dismantlement of the nuclear program. Israel wants entire dismantlement, much like what's going on with the Syrian chemical weapons. I spoke at a platform with the former UN Ambassador John Bolton on September 11th, the 10-year anniversary of the 9/11 crisis, and we were at a banquet the night before. This was in Los Angeles, and he was asked at that time, would America strike? This was back in 2011. And he said that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Secretary of Defense Robert Gates had thoroughly convinced Barack Obama to go for containment, that a strike would be too dangerous from all of these different reasons. And I want to say one last thing about Israel, perhaps taking the onus into their own lap. Of course, they've struck nuclear sites before. The Osirak with Iraq, that was 1980, 1981. They struck Syria's nuclear plant in 2007. And Bill and I had the opportunity to have breakfast this last December with the former Consulate General of Texas from Israel, Yoram Edinger. He's also a former Israeli ambassador. And we asked him, is Israel going to strike? And he took us to a parallel back in 1977 with Menachem Begin, when he became the first prime minister of Israel from the Likud party. And he had a tough decision on his hands, and that was watching Iraq's nuclear program develop. At that time, the Western world was supporting Saddam Hussein because what happened in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution in Iran. No one wanted anything to do to support that, so we started supporting Saddam Hussein, who then starts to build a nuclear program. So his program was advancing, and Yoram Edinger tells us that Menachem Begin called all of his confidants and his higher-ups and military officers in for a private closed-door meeting, and he said, what would happen if we struck Iraq's nuclear facility? And every one of them, to a man, apparently listed all the dangers and problems and said, we don't want to do that. One, will bring down the whole Western world because we're supporting Saddam Hussein. Two, we'll bring ourselves into an Islamic mother of all Mideast wars. And they gave him a list of all these different reasons. And then Menachem Begin stood up and said, well, I've got one question for all of you. And he thanked them. He knew they were all very sincere with their answers and concerned. He said, I got one question for you, and what's the price of inaction? And that's the destruction of this country. He said, we will act, and we will take them out. And that's the same tough decision, if you think about it, the parallels with Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's what Yoram Edinger was, I think that was his way, Bill, of telling us, get ready.
That's right. Perfect.
Okay, we have a gentleman up here for the next question.
Yes, Question, actually, two parts. There's been a lot of talk, and there's been some books written, John Hagee, about the 4 blood moons and the significance of the blood moons and possible end times scenarios. I've read the books, and Mark Phelps also talked about this and has read the books about it. The next blood moon is going to be on Rosh Hashanah, September 24th, the Feast of Trumpets. If you look back through history, according to
Actually, it'll be on the first day of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles.
Feast of Tabernacles.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's correct on that. Bottom line, though, is according to the books, every time the blood moons have coincided with the Jewish feast holidays, Israel has always been in the center of some supernatural world events. 1492, of course, they were expelled from Spain. 1948, they became a new country. 1967, the Six-Day War, in which they captured Jerusalem. Now, in light of what is happening with the war now with Gaza, of course, there's Hezbollah is up north now. They may get involved, and then now that this week we're hearing of unrest in the West Bank, and Palestinians are starting to shoot people and raise problems. Every time it's happened in the past, Israel has expanded and increased its land through the blood moon feast. You see that happening this time too, where they may take over control of the West Bank once and for all, and Gaza once and for all, and say enough is enough. This land belongs to us. God gave us this land, and we're taking it. We're tired of being fired upon with all these rockets. The other question involves what you see ISIS is doing, how they may play out in terms of what happens to Israel.
Okay, so we've got 2 questions. One is, do the blood moon tetrads that are occurring right now have any significance with Israel? Will they prevail as they have done with some conditioned historical precedent of winning a war, surviving the persecution, and expanding territorially? And then the second question is, what is ISIS's role on the scene these days in the Levant? So, Bill, do you want to start with that?
Yes. The blood red moon situation is fascinating. I know, and I appreciate Mark doing this. In February of 2008, he saw on our website a picture of a blood red moon over the old city of Jerusalem, and it piqued Mark's interest. He was curious about that, and the omen. The rabbis look at red moons as an omen of future war. In February of 2008, when there was that blood red moon over Jerusalem, there was war talk at that time with Hezbollah again. I mean, it was the Ashkenazi and Barak were talking like we could have a war at any moment. Nasrallah of Hezbollah was talking war. So once again, you saw that pattern. I'm very impressed by the fact that the last time this happened was at the time of the Six-Day War. You had the blood red moon, then the Six-Day War, and then you had the next one on the first day of Sukkot in 67, and then the following 68, you had one on Passover and Sukkot. First day of Passover and Sukkot, and the time previous to that was in 49 and 50 at the time of War of Independence. And the other time, 1492, was it happened in 93 and 94. This is the 7th time it's happened since the time of Christ's birth. The 8th time is right now, this year and next year. I was in Israel in January talking to a good friend of mine, Wayne Hilston, who's the pastor of King of Kings. I said, Wayne, have you ever experienced a calm like I'm experiencing, like my wife is experiencing, that we are right now here in January? And he said, no. He said, in my 30 years of being in Israel, I've never experienced a calm like this. I talked to Bill and my friend Chris Mitchell with CBN, same thing. Chris, have you experienced a calmness like this? And he said, no. And he'd been there 13 years. And he said, we were talking back and forth, what do you expect? What do you see coming? And I said, based on this calmness, it's hard to fully understand. But as Wayne said, as Chris said, as I said, is this the calm before the storm? And we just got back 2 weeks ago from a month in Israel. And we were there right after those, we were right there just before those young men were kidnapped. And then they were kidnapped. And I went out on a media tour out to the bus stop where these young men had been kidnapped. And all of a sudden, this intensity is built up to where we are today. So it is an incredible time of intensity. The question is for Israel is, we've got to eliminate this infrastructure problem of Hamas. And that's what they are attempting to do right now. And I think it's so important to deal with the infrastructure problem of Hamas, because if they get in a war, along the lines of Bill's writings in Psalm 83, with Hezbollah, with Iran, that seems imminent, they need to take care of the internal problem. And they've been determined to do that. And fortunately right now they have an Egyptian president that does not like the Muslim Brotherhood and does not like Hamas, who has shut the borders, who is also getting incredible cooperation from Israeli intelligence on helping weed out these radical Muslims that are in the Sinai that want to overthrow El-Sisi's government. So the cooperation between Israel and Egypt right now to deal with Hamas-backed, Muslim Brotherhood-backed terrorists in the Sinai is very significant. And you'll notice the conversation today, that Bill will probably go into more details. Right now we have literally Kerry with 5 leaders in France, along with Turkey and Qatar, trying to figure out a deal. Egypt's not part of that. So it's building to the fulfillment of these scriptures that Bill has written about.
Yeah, I want to answer a few things to that as well. As far as the blood moons, I believe they deserve an honorable mention. The verdict's really not out on those yet. Mark Hitchcock has written a book. He sort of has naysayed the reasons why they may not be. And I only tell that to you and to the listeners on the radio, just so they can, if they want to study Mark Biltz's writings or John Hagee's book or Mark Hitchcock's book, they can get a better understanding of everything. Now, I've been on Praise the Lord TV shows with both Hagee and Biltz when they were presenting their books, and they present a compelling argument. So from my perspective, I believe they deserve honorable mentions at the very least. Now, as far as what will happen, will Israel win a war? And is it related to the blood moons? Well, Israel is going to win a war. In my estimation, they're going to win the climactic concluding Arab-Israeli war in Psalm 83, and the Israeli Defense Forces today exist in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Now will they expand territorially? Well, they have a pattern of doing that. They did that during Joshua's time 3,300 years ago when they won wars. They did that in King David's time 3,000 years ago, and Solomon's when they won wars, and they did it in 1967. Now, they were given the land from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which courses through modern-day Iraq and Syria, so from Egypt all the way over. And someday the Israelis will possess all that land, which right now ISIS is trying to stake claim of quite a bit of that land. But the Israelis will someday be able to bear the acronym of ISIS, is Israeli State of the Levant. That sort of thing. So that's forthcoming. Now, I personally believe that they're going to gain more land after they win the Psalm 83 war. And I point out numerous scriptures. I'll just tell you a couple of them. They're going to grow incrementally, and it helps them their borders be more defensible. Jeremiah 49, verses 1 through 6, there's an alarm of war in northern Jordan. Israel's involved. They win the war, and it says that they take sovereignty over the territory. Obadiah 1 talks about them gaining full control over the West Bank and Gaza, parts of southern Lebanon. And there's some other scriptures as well. 5 cities in the land of Egypt will someday speak the language of Canaan, which is Hebrew. That's in Isaiah 19, verses, I think it's 17 and 18. Those are just a few of them, and I have them all outlaid in my book. So did we answer your question okay on that?
So you're thinking that Israel will overcome whatever ISIS tries to do as far as gaining more territory than Iraq, and then maybe going into Jordan, and then finally into Israel. So you think there will some point there will stop that movement? Yeah,
ISIS, I was saying this last night on at the banquet. ISIS presently is staking claim to swaths of territory that very much resembled ancient Assyria at the time Psalm 83 was written. And we do believe, Bill, I think you concur, that at some point they're going to want to move towards Jordan. Now, that'll be a very difficult take for them, but they moved from Syria quite easily over into the northern part of Iraq, because those are predominantly Sunni areas, but they're going to have trouble going to southern Iraq, Baghdad on down to Najaf and Basra down there, and Karbala, which is one of the holiest sites in Shiite theology over there. That's all Shiite down there. So they're liable to kind of box themselves in here. The Kurds are moving in on them on the other side of the mountains over there in northwestern Iraq. So Jordan becomes a likely target, as does Kuwait. But Jordan is, if they take over Jordan, and it says in Psalm 83 verse 8 that Assyria joins with Jordan, and helps them. Now, Jordan's got the weakest army in the Psalm 83 Confederacy by far when you throw in Hezbollah's firepower in Lebanon, so they would need some assistance. If they took over Jordan presently, they would also probably be able to take over control of the Temple Mount, because that's now under the control of the Waqf, which was under Jordanian sovereignty. So I see them continuing to try to make movements, but I see them at some point being involved probably in Psalm 83 along with those other terrorist groups and not prevailing.
One other thing I might toss in on the blood red moons, and I appreciate what Bill said. There's Mark is the one that went into the NASA computers, and I believe that, from my writing about eye to eye and the consequences and watching patterns, I think the fact that he went into 5,000 years worth of NASA history, aligning that with Jewish feast, is pretty extraordinary, and it will still play out. I agree with Bill; it's still playing out. I mean, we're in war right now. We were definitely in a conflict. Does it have to be a significant conflict like the 6-Day War or Yom Kippur? I don't know. But the fact is, and I know what Mark's written, what Hagee's written, and also Mark Hitchcock, who I have a deep respect for. I am not getting involved in what they're saying. I'm just looking at the pattern. That, for me, that's what I do. I watch patterns, and I see the pattern of the fact that this is the 8th time and the last time in the century, pretty significant. So we'll see what happens and how it plays out.